morning, students.
Good morning, teacher.
Good morning. Input control questions. First question, genetically modified microorganisms. Who wants answer?
Can I
Can I
answer?
answer?
Please answer.
Can I answer?
Yamira Karibay, please answer.
Genetically modified organisms, microorganisms. Genetically modified organisms, GMO, is any organism whose genetic material has been altered using genetic engineering techniques. The exact definition of a genetically modified microorganisms and what constitutes genetic engineering varies, with the most common being an organism altered in a way that doesn't occur naturally by mating and or natural recombination. A wide variety of organisms have been genetically modified organisms, from animals to plants and microorganisms. Genes have been transferred within the same species, across species, creating transgenic organisms, and even across kingdoms. New genes can be introduced, or endogenous genes can be enhanced, altered, or knocked out, creating creation. A genetically modified organism is a multi-step process, and genetic engineers must isolate the gene they wish to insert into the host organism and combine it with other genetic elements, including a promoter and terminator region, and often a selectable marker. A number of techniques are available for inserting the isolated gene into the host genome. And is the GMO organisms, the usually important organisms for biotechnology and molecular biology, with genetics fundamentals of in a environmental and society.
Okay, Yamira. Excellent. Next question, genetically engineered microorganism in biotechnology. Who wants answer?
Can I answer, teacher?
Please answer.
Genetically engineered microorganisms or modified microorganisms is microorganisms whose genetic material has been altered using genetic engineering. Techniques inspired by natural genetic exchange between microorganisms. These techniques are generally known as recombinant DNA technology. Genetically modified bacteria were the first organisms to be modified in the laboratory due to simple genetics, and these organisms are now used for several purposes, and they are particularly important in producing large amounts of pure human proteins for use in medicine. That's all.
Okay, Aruzhan Miranova. Excellent. Who wants answer? We start our lesson, seminar work 15, role of genetic engineering in food biotechnology development. Aim of the work is study the role of genetic engineering in food biotechnology development, and the plan of the lesson, role of genetic engineering in food biotechnology, and watch the video. Are GMOs good or bad? Genetically modified GM foods are foods derived from organisms whose genetic material DNA has been modified in a way that does not occur naturally through the introduction of a gene from a different organisms. The technology is often called modern biotechnology or gene technology, sometimes also recombinant DNA technology or genetic engineering. Genetic engineering allows scientists to move desired genes from one plant or animals into another. The process to create GE foods is different than selective breeding. This involves selecting plants or animals with desired traits and breeding them. Over time, this results in offspring with those desired traits. Genetically modified foods, GM foods, also known as genetically engineered foods, GE foods. Bioengineered foods are foods produced from organisms that have had changes introduced into their DNA using the methods of genetic engineering. Genetic engineering techniques allows for the introduction of new traits and properties. Currently available GM foods stem mostly from plants, but in the future, foods derived from genetic modified microorganisms or GM animals are likely to be introduced on the market. Most existing genetically modified crops have been developed to improve yield through the introduction of resistance to plant diseases or of increased tolerance of herbicides. GM foods can also allow for reduction in food prices through improved yields and reliability. Bacteria have been used in the production of food for a long time, and specific strains have been developed and selected for that work on an industrial scale. The genetically modified microorganisms used in food production industry to produce enzymes, amino acids, flavorings, and other compounds. In the future, genetic modification could be aimed at altering the nutrient content of food, reducing its allergenic potential, or improving the efficiency of food production system. All GM foods should be assessed before being allowed on the market. Information, education, and labeling are key factors in the public's understanding and acceptance of foods produced by this technology. Consumers can make informed choices based on facts. What is the Codex Alimentarius? The Codex Alimentarius of Food Code is a collection of standards, guidelines, and codes of practice adopted by the Codex Alimentarius Commission. Codex standards ensure that food is safe and can be traded. The 188 Codex members have negotiated science-based recommendations in all areas related to food safety and quality. Codex committees, when developing standards, need to analyze risks. Independent scientists' advice is provided to Codex by expert bodies organized by FAO, WHO. These bodies also give direct advice to member governments. Genetically control questions, genetically modified GM foods, the role of genetic engineering in food biotechnology development, and prepare the presentation by the topic theme of seminar work. The role of genetic engineering in food biotechnology development. And watch the video, GMOs, good or bad.
GMOs are one of the most controversial areas of science. Genetic engineering is used in many fields, but even though medical applications like GM insulin are widely accepted, the debate heats up when it comes to food and agriculture. Why is that? Why is the same thing treated so differently? Let's try to get to the bottom of this and explore the facts, the fears, and the future of GMOs. Humans have been genetically modifying plants and animals for thousands of years. Maybe a few of your crops had very good yields. Maybe one of your wolves was especially loyal. So you did the smart thing and bred the plants and animals that had traits beneficial to you. Traits are just an expression of genes. So with each generation, those genes got more pronounced. After thousands of years, almost every single plant and animal around us is vastly different from its pre-domesticated state. If humans have been changing genes for millennia, what makes a so-called genetically modified organism, or GMO, different? Selective breeding is basically hoping for lucky hits. Genetic engineering eliminates this factor. We can choose the traits we want, make fruit grow bigger, immune to pests, and so on. So why are people concerned about them? Let's start with one of the most common objections to GMOs. Gene flow, meaning GM crops could mix with traditional crops and introduce unwanted characteristics. There is a method of complete prevention, but big anti-GMO by itself, terminator seeds. The idea is that they could produce sterile plants, requiring farmers to buy new seeds every year. The very concept of this, however, caused a public outcry, stopping the technology being put to use. This brings us back to the unintentional spreading of engineered DNA. There have been cases of GMOs growing where they weren't planted and traces of modified genes found in foreign crops. But GM plants can't run wild entirely. Many crops pollinate themselves, and all crops have to be related to mingle. There are also cultural methods like buffer zones to keep unintentional crossing at a minimum. But if it's possible in principle that a GMO could unintentionally cross with a non-GMO, there's actually a more important question. Is food that comes from GM crops different to food from non-GM crops? This question has been a major concern from the very beginning. GM plants that are destined to be eaten are checked for possible dangers, and the results are evaluated by multiple agencies. After more than 30 years and thousands of studies, the science is in. Eating GMO is no more risky than their GMO equivalent. But don't just take our word. Sources for this and other claims are in the video description. But what about plants that have been engineered to be toxic? For example, BT crops. A gene borrowed from the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis lets engineered plants produce a protein that destroys the digestive system of specific insect pests. The plant makes its own pesticide. Insects that eat it die. That sounds alarming. Pesticide sprays can be washed off, while the poison in BT crops is inside the plant. But actually, it's not a big deal. Poison is really just a question of different perspectives. What's harmless to one species? Coffee, for example, poison to us. Or take chocolate. It's dangerous for dogs, but a pleasure for humans. BT crops produce a protein that is tailored to the specific design of the digestive tract of certain insects. It's completely harmless for us. There's also the opposite approach. Plants that are engineered to be resistant to certain weed killers. This way, farmers can use them widely, killing the other plants competing for resources without harming the crop. Here we get to the dark underbelly of GMOs. For the pesticide industry, they are big business. Over 90% of all cash crops in the US are herbicide resistant, mostly to glyphosate. Safer than many other herbicides. Still, this means farmers have a strong incentive to rely on this one method only, casting more balanced ways of managing weeds aside. That's one of the most fundamental problems with the GMO debate. Much of the criticism of this technology is actually criticism of modern agriculture and the business practice of the huge corporations that control our food supply. This criticism is not only valid, it's also important. We need to change agriculture to a more sustainable model. GMOs as a technology are actually an ally and not an enemy in that fight, helping to save and protect nature and minimize our impact on the environment. Some positive examples. Eggplant is an important crop in Bangladesh, but often whole harvests are destroyed by pests. Farmers had to rely heavily on pesticides. Not only was this very expensive, farmers also frequently got sick. The introduction of a new GM eggplant in 2013 stopped this. The same Bt protein we talked about before, an effective killer of insects but harmless to humans, was engineered into them. This reduced insecticide use on eggplants by more than 80%. The health of farmers improves and their income rose dramatically. And sometimes a GM approach is the only option. In the 1990s, the papaya industry in Hawaii was under attack. Modified to be vaccinated against the virus. Without it, the state's papaya industry would have collapsed. All these stories show a very narrow application. 99% of all GMOs we use right now produce pesticides or are resistant against them. There is so much more we could do. Scientists are working on GMOs that could improve our diet. Plants that produce more or different nutrients, like fruit with higher antioxidant levels that help to fight diseases, or rice with additional vitamins. On a larger scale, we're trying to engineer plants that are more resilient to climate change. Solve floods. GMOs can also not only reduce agriculture's impact on the environment, but actively help to protect it. Scientists are working on crops that can draw nitrogen from the air like microbes. Nitrogen is a common fertilizer, but its buildup pollutes the groundwater and speeds up climate change. Plants that collect their own nitrogen can fix two problems at once: the overuse of fertilizers in the developed world, as well as the shortage of it in developing countries. We could even modify plants to become super effective carbon collectors like the American chestnut tree to mitigate and actually convert. The world eats 11 million pounds of food every day. A UN estimate suggests we'll need 70% more by 2050. We could grow that food by clearing more and more forests to create fields and pastures and by using more pesticides. Or we find a way to do it on the land we've got right now with more effective methods like GM crops. Intensifying farming instead of expanding it means GMOs could become the new organic. In a nutshell, GMOs have the potential to not only drastically our most powerful weapon to save our biosphere. This video took more than 600 hours to make, which would be impossible without viewer support on patreon.com. If you'd like to support carefully researched content made with love, it's really very helpful, and you can get your own bird as a reward. If you want to learn more about genetic modification, we have more videos explaining the opportunities and risks of the technology and how it could impact our future.
Our lesson finished. Goodbye, students.
Goodbye, teacher.
Good luck.